That sounded so calm. I'm going to just redo that in my own way, just be really relaxed about it. I am actually super nervous, which is so funny because we talk all the time, and but like you guys are actually listening, which is what we always want, but it's kind of a pain when it happens. All right, so let me know if I'm too close or far from this mic. I missed the opening of this show because I was in Arizona. My boyfriend's family took me birding. His mom's a big bird watcher. So when you look at a bird, you're not supposed to look at it right in the eye because it sets up this whole like predator-prey thing. So you're supposed to look to one side of it, otherwise it'll feel you and take off. So we're going to kind of use that format here. We're going to look to the peripheries as a way to make sure the thing in front of us doesn't disappear. So we're going to be talking about both Liz's work and my work in connection to that, but by talking about some things on the outside. The way that I decided to do this is to, I'm going to sit up taller, is to talk about drops, but images of drops specifically. So to use an image of a drop as a way to think about her work. So this image I've always really loved. I've been obsessed with it. Every time a postcard of it comes on eBay, I get it. I'm trying to get a whole puddle. But this particular image is important to photography or the history of photography, right? Because it was a time when we could stop motion and literally kind of create an anatomy of movement. Do you hear my voice? My students know me, like it never does this in class. But what was interesting to me is not so much the motion, but this moment in time when we could use an image to talk about or to learn more about the physical world. So you're using a picture to learn about things that actually are in space. So beyond that, like that's why it's important, but why I like it, I thought I wanted to use those things more than that significance. So the reason why I'm attracted to an image of a drop. So what do I love about it? Chitty, what do you love? I really like that in a drop you have the visual presence of gravity. I love that there's this really thin skin that holds, it's to this like tension that's holding it so that it's independent of a mass, but that it's undeniably part of this larger whole, something bigger than itself, but it's its own independent unit. I like thinking about a tiny little thing hurtling through space for its whole life before it has any kind of visible influence or impact. It's that like free fall time, but like before it's like by its inception and before it smashes. I like that it's fluid, so its content is really easy for us to understand, that it's constantly changing. You can't pin it down. You can try to define it, but it's going to change in a second. So it's like a transformer. It's like a chameleon. I really like that the image of a drop makes an invisible thing visible. So tiny things, tiny invisible things throughout history have had an incredible impact. And if I'm being honest, I I relate to it because I often feel very tiny. So I'm using now photography to talk about objects, which is not what I expected. I thought I would be mostly talking about objects, but I ended up talking mostly about photography. And this was because when I went to the show on Tuesday, was the first time I'd actually seen the physical matter of Liz's work. I had only ever experienced it through images. And that was kind of the guideline of my talk. I was like, I will only use images that I find on Google and my direct environment to be able to learn about her work, which means talking to the people that are around me and whatever they give me, I can use. So this is Harold Edgerton. This was in 1927-ish. It was in the MoMA show about photography back then, where they did 98 years. I don't know why they didn't wait till 100. I like that. I couldn't wait either. So it was like, but there's like an indexical relationship it's sort of the way that we record the reality of the world is through photography, and there's this 1-to-1 ratio that you see in Liz's work with all her casts. They're just the exact scale of the thing that she's referencing. And also when I was there, I was kind of struck by all the wrappers and the skins and like the boxes, and even like the skins you put your feet into that we call shoes, and then the boxes that those things were in and the containers for that. So I kept thinking about this like thin tension between what's on the inside and what's on the outside. Edgerton was just for my students. The Edgerton, he was a physicist. He taught electrical engineering at MIT, and I've got a quote from him. He helped Jacques Cousteau with like deep sea photography and also looking for the Loch Ness monster. No shit, that's a whole other lecture. But he has a quote. He says, "Work hard, tell everyone everything you know, close a deal with a handshake, and have fun." We did pretty good. So in thinking about photography, you've got the beginning of photography coming around in the beginning of the 1800s. This is 1870s. So, hi, guys. So you've got 1870s. You've got Muybridge looking at motion. So now you've got this taxonomy of a pictorial image, right? And this, I think, came out of a bet where they were trying to see if when a horse ran, if all 4 feet came off the ground at once. But I'm reading this book called Objectivity, and it's looking at the history of objectivity, specifically in science. And so it looks at scientific images from the very beginning, when you have, when we were using truth to nature. So we're looking at nature and we're drawing a picture of it. And then when it moved on to being able to use a camera. So you have the objective mechanical truth of the camera eye. And then beyond that, you have what they decide to call trained judgment. So you're looking at the mechanical objective images and creating another image that's based off of what you think you're seeing in those objective images. But the way they describe it is really beautiful, because they don't talk about it like building a church on top of the ruin of the temple that was there before and completely destroying the logic. They talk about it as if you're looking up at the stars at a single constellation, and then all of a sudden this new star flickers in, and it really confuses what you thought you were looking at, and all of the things are at play all the time. So they're constantly influencing each other, which is not a linear narrative that you get in history books. So it was kind of rad to think about it like that. And the first example is a drop. So they use another dude that was obsessed with a drop and the image of a drop. This guy is Arthur Worthington. So at the same time that Muybridge is doing his thing with the motion and the horses, this guy is sitting in a dark room by himself thinking. Any artists out here? So, and he's looking at, what he's doing is he's using this millisecond flash to burn an image into the retina of his eye, and then that latent image that's burned into the retina of his eye, he tries to remember it and draw it. And he does it thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So essentially what he's doing is taking like an average. It's like the way we deal with the weather, where you're like, oh, the weather was about 60 degrees, but nobody's talking about what it feels like. Anyway, it's just the Chicago frustration. It's a really beautiful day today. So in the drawings, you've got this idealized image that has pretty much nothing to do with the truth. But we're looking at it as a way to figure out what it is that we think we're looking at. So this was before he was able to use a camera to do it. And one of the things he noticed was the beauty of the symmetry. Like, he was obsessed with this symmetrical form and its place in nature. And when he got to the camera, he was shocked at how irregular the whole thing was. There was all these mistakes that were on the edge of perfection that he had kind of ignored as a way to be able to give an idealized image. And when he used the camera, he was having all these mistakes that were present. And it really made him deny all the research he had done before and be like, forget that thing I published. This is the new thought. But the interesting thing, too, is the way that it ties in with printmaking. So in the beginning, you have these drawings, and in order to get them out into the public, you've got to make etchings of them. And then when you have the photographs, even then, we didn't have the technology to reproduce them mechanically. So there was no halftone dot. So you have to take the photograph that tells the absolute truth, and then you have to make a drawing of it so that someone else can turn it into an engraving, so that you can have a really shitty reproduction of it made. And then, that's why there's so much talk about images in science books, where they're like, please forgive the quality of the... But here we enter, he said, how could he have eyes for so long for a perfection that was not there? which is lovely. So this is my favorite character, the fallible human historian. And it reminded me of another image of something semi-invisible, which really got me into the arts in the first place. So this is Robert Hooke, and this is a flea. It was in his 1665 book, Micrographia, and it was all things that are not visible to the human eye. And the microscope comes around like the end of the 1500s, and then you've got this guy kind of making his own tools and looking at a cork. He was well known for like looking at a sliver of cork and figuring out that like the cellular system of structure of plants. But this was an image I saw in college, and it kind of it messed up my whole career there. Because then I did a triple major. So I started doing fine arts, biology, and education. Because I was in science looking at these etchings, which I didn't know what an etching was at the time, and I was trying to understand this thing that I was learning, but I was noticing that the drawings and the engravings were giving me more information than the photographs, and that really boggled my brain. So this was at a time when we were making an atlas, or very heavily making atlases in terms of how do we perceive and depict the wonders of the world. So we're setting the standards of how to do that. And that really hasn't stopped. So, but think about what that means. That means we're at a time when you're making a quantifiable image of something that is invisible to the eye. So you've got an image that stands in for something that before was only present as an idea or as a concept. So an image standing in for a concept. And this is this epitomizes the entire scientific enterprise. It's like the ability to take a living thing, turn it into an image so that we can understand it. Which is exactly what I ended up doing with Liz's work. I tried to approach it as if it was like something I'd never seen in the world before. So what do we do when we encounter a thing that we've never seen before? How do we figure out what it is? Does anyone know what this is? So, like the sad thing about what we've done to scientists is that we've kind of tricked them into not being able to be honest about where all their discoveries are actually coming from. Because really, at the heart of it, it is invented, and it's this curiosity and like sparkling wonder and like speculative imagination that lets them think about why a thing is what it is or what it could be in the first place. So this is not a familiar thing to anyone here? Yeah, what is it? A century plant. So awesome. So a really easy way to figure things out is to use the resources that you have around you. And I have this room. Has anyone seen it in actual life? You have? Maybe? Yes. So, and I could go on that and I never have to learn anything else about it. So it's not a century plant. Right, now I need to drink water. This is where I make a point. I just learned what it was myself. But it's endemic to Hawaii and it's in Haleakala, and it's this plant called the silver sword. So I'm gonna use it to talk about how do we learn about a thing. So what do we do? How do we figure it out? It's time and place, like its moment in time and space is important, because if we showed up at a different season or a different time of the year, it would look totally different and we'd describe it in a completely different way. So there's many factors that are influencing our understanding of its reality. And this comes into play in my own life. I'm a visiting artist at the Wright Auction House. Which means they let me, out of the kindness of their heart, basically distract their employees every Friday for about 4 hours. And I just sit among the objects it's, my friend jokes that it's the warehouse where I go to meditate. But this is Devin, and she's one of the photographers that takes the photographs for the catalogs. And we're always talking about how to use a lie to tell the truth. And in her work, she's brilliant at what she does, but she understands both the clientele that she's dealing with and the history of the object and its material in order to use different ways of photographing things that give you different truths about it. And so the environment that's around a thing completely shifts your understanding of it. And that's what we do. We break it down into data. When I lived in New York, my job was to take scientific specimens, like the dried specimens, and I had to refile them while listening to NPR. It was the best job I've ever had. Sorry, SAIC. And it's this way of using a dead thing to understand a living thing. So a dried out skin of a thing in order to understand something that was alive and understand life. And I didn't think I was going to be able to show this image because I didn't think it was going to directly relate. And then the more that I looked at it, the more I realized it is exactly what we are all talking about. So this was the first image that I found when I tried to figure out who she was. So Bitter Living Through Chemistry is, they have a bunch of different ones where they take an actor and they figure out what actor would play that artist if they did a documentary. So by using something that mimics, and even not exactly, that slightly mimics the aesthetics and like outward shell of a thing, we can begin to tell the story of its original thing, or its original source, right? So, and in this, the viewer becomes really important. They become an agent because they're the one that like lets Meryl Streep be Liz. They totally let it happen. So do you see the reflection in her glasses? Carson, can we zoom in on that 10 times? Cool. Thanks. So you notice there, I think what I'm seeing is, it looks like the sunlight's coming through the window at the Renaissance Society. Computer, enhance. Yeah, it is. So here we're using the illusion of truth to tell a lie, which then lets us more directly understand and imagine the truth. So seriously though, like if you've seen CSI, that computer show, that's so sad. That TV show. I revealed too much. That computer show where they like use all these imaging, like I can't wait till we as artists get what the military has to teach art class. So like, yeah, can we go into the Rodin? I want to focus in on the thumbprint on the inner left buttocks, but from the inverted interior. Like, it's going to be great. Anyway, but what we're doing here is, and what we did there was use an invented and a potentially unreliable system in order to decode and try to make logic happen, and most likely getting it wrong every single time. And what I'm suggesting is that we do this more often. So the process is not free of fault. You're going to trip the entire way. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, and you're going to misinterpret things. And probably make a lot of wrong conclusions, but that in looking at those mistakes and those misunderstandings and in those wrong conclusions, we're actually seeing a clear image of truth. So the trouble with this is that it looks a lot like ignorance, and that's embarrassing. As if we don't know what we're doing, which, like, side note, is actually the truth about everything, that we don't actually know what we're doing, so it's okay. But check out this example. So in 2011, between 2011 and 2014, Google image search had a beautiful mistake going on that they have now fixed, sadly. But I took one of my artworks, so it's up in the top. Does the arrow go there? Can you see that arrow? So I took one of my artworks and I dropped it in reverse Google image search. So it's this content-based image retrieval system that brings up visually similar images. And then they weren't using hashtags. And so what they were using was this mathematical algorithm that basically quantified the quantity, location, and tone of individual pixels within an image, and then showed you images that were visually similar in terms of that mathematical equation. So it's a completely broken system, but it's brilliant because what it does at that time is it shows us we can it drains the image of its content. It makes it so that it's not about the thing referred to in the image. It's just about the image itself, or the pixels in it. So let me see one thing. Yeah, okay, this was why. So it's held together by surface tension, but it's got repercussions in terms of how we use and consider a representational image. So what I like about it is it destroys the function of an image. It also feels a lot like Liz's work and what it feels like to look at it, every new pixel you get, and it also feels a lot like my life, which is just sort of this series of pixels that right now just can shuffle at any second and recreate a new reality with every new pixel that comes in. So you take a photograph and you turn it 90 degrees, you give me its profile, and all the content is gone. All the data is still there, but I don't get access to the content. And that's when it becomes this sort of skin or this vessel for data. And it happens all the time, and I'm going to show you some of my favorite examples. This is the Fruit Museum in Italy, Turin. I found it by accident, and I lost my mind. So this is a scientist freak artist who was really interested in trying to show you the truth of all the fruits that were in the world, specifically that could be used for agriculture. But you can't preserve a fruit very easily unless you freeze it, and even then it messes it up. And if you put it in liquid, it changes the way it looks. So what he thought he would do was recreate them all by casting them in lead and then painting them to look exactly like the original. So this is science and craft and sculpture and painting and image making all in one beautiful weird bundle where you're not allowed to take any pictures at all, so I didn't. Look at how the grapes are falling to bits. So the reality of this is like, it's so clear that it's not what it is that we're looking at, and yet we understand what we should be thinking about just by looking at the thing that is not real. It happens all the time in entertainment as well. This is my favorite example. I talk about Clarence Nash all the time. So Clarence Nash is the voice behind Donald Duck. And this is just an example of when we look at Donald Duck as a puppet, we're so ready to drop what we know about the materials with what we want, which is we just want the story. And it's easy to believe in it. So we know that it's made out of clay and paint and fabric. But there's this enchantment that comes from this wavering between accepting the three-dimensional reality of the thing and acknowledging and welcoming its deception. We do it in art a lot, using a lie to tell a truth. This is just my favorite. Look at that mush. And we know exactly what it is and even what time of day it is. This one I just learned about. I'm not going to give an image for politics, but we do it all the time in politics too, and also in medicine. So these you can get on Amazon. They're called Zebos. They are honestly deceptive pills. So they're placebos, but you know that they're placebos. So they figured out recently that it doesn't actually matter that deception is involved when you're using placebos, that it's you can know that it's a fake and it will still work. This directly relates to Liz's work. It doesn't matter that we know it's a fake. It's the act of pretending and believing that makes it relevant and gives it its impact. So the image matters because the outside image, the skin, because it transports us in our headspace to the right place. But the only reason it works is because of whatever goes on within our heads. This is another place it happens in advertising. So this is one of my favorite zombies. Who is this? Sorry? Audrey Hepburn. I'm going to drink water because I'm about to make a point. No, sir. No, kind sir. This is a CGI replication of Audrey Hepburn that was put in a 2014 commercial by Dove about Galaxy Chocolate Bar. And so the visual effects team had to use every single, the entire film catalog and every single image that they could get in order to make it so that when she changed expressions, it was believable. So every single film she's ever made was basically PDF'd into this typeface, right? This idealized, hyper-real image of her. There's a lot of problems with this. We can't talk about them now. Her son, by the way, was super pumped about this because she always ate chocolate, one piece only, every day after her nap. So this is, again, a lie to tell a beautiful truth. So one of the articles I did get was from a studio mate. She gave me a book about Liz, and one of the articles was by this man named Bill Jeffers, and he wrote an article called "The Desert of the Real." And in it, he refers to this chart, which I just learned about. So this is Masahiro Mori, who in 1970 created this chart. It's called the Uncanny Valley, and it's a hypothetical relationship between the degree of an object's resemblance to a human being and the emotional response to that object. So it was in relation to looking at like robots and AA? Guys? AI. I'm dyslexic. And so I thought I would be mostly interested in like figuring out what this chart is and understanding it, because I love prosthetic hands, and the University of Chicago has a really good prosthetic hand that was made here by completely forgetting what a human hand looks like. But instead I got interested in this conversation. So they're asking him, since then the Uncanny Valley has become a sort of principle in the robotics field. What's your take on this? He says, it's nothing for me to brag about, but I am pleasantly surprised that it has become so well known, that people are talking about it so much. It means that it took 40 years, free-falling, tiny little thing hurtling through space for 40 years for the world to catch up. Yes, I agree. This may not get across to people overseas, but I think of myself as the dog in the story Hanasaka Jisan. In this Japanese folk story, a dog barks to let his owners know where to dig, and when they dig, they find gold. I seem to have a good nose for sniffing out interesting things, but I don't have the skill to dig them up. That's why I bark. Dig here. And then other people will dig and find treasure. Or if people don't dig, I dig a little bit by myself. And then people come in like a gold rush. The Uncanny Valley was just one of those things that I sensed. So in the 1970s, there wasn't even any AI that looked at all like a human. So he's just using intuition. He's going on this feeling he's got. And in a way, it's like, imagine you got the whole ocean, and then far, far off in the distance, you've got this flock of birds, and they're going nuts. It's not the birds that's important, but you know that there's something under there. So what I'm saying is, you follow that feeling, and then you end up finding the thing that you didn't know you were looking for. So Liz is not showing us the fish. She's showing us the chaotic birds above the fish. She's barking. Everything in that gallery is a bark. And you got to dig to find the gold. Instead of this traditional way of presenting an object and its content or meaning, Liz basically is dropping Zebos. Okay, this is thought manipulation. So back to the drop. Here's another image of a drop I love. This is from Chris Ware, a Chicago favorite, The Smartest Kid on Earth book. And I love there. So this is just about time and this inability to comprehend in the moment what's later gonna make a mark. You have to slow down to read this. You have to be, every square is now, and then now, and then now, and then now, and then now, and you're constantly in the present with it. This one's beautiful. We've all been in this exact spot here. There's Chicago. So it requires time, a kind of digestion. So I'm about to begin a project in London working with the Abbey Warburg Library, which they have a photographic archive. And the last time I was there, I had a very short amount of time to be there, but I asked them, could I please see the photographs of domestic objects? So that was the category I was looking at. So what's this an image of? A picture. It's a picture of a picture. But because it's printed, it's a picture of an object, but because it's printed, it becomes kind of an object in and of itself. And on the back of it is some writing. So we find out that this is an object that was made in the 1700s. It's silver. It's got this floral display on it. And the funny thing about it is that in its reflection is the kind of exact history of how this photograph was made, of how it was documented. So you can see the camera and the sheets that were set up and the room that it was set up in. So you're learning way more about it than just looking at this picture of a picture. So very often the surface on an object or an image is actually a distraction from its function or from the intended focus of its content. We see this all the time on the internet. So this is a beautiful Craigslist example. Right, and I started to think about thrift stores and museums and people's homes and eBay as this kind of collective repository, this like galaxy of objects that's just, they're always moving around. And it reminded me of that, the big plastic island that's in the Pacific, of all the trash that won't go away because it's plastic, and it just keeps grinding on itself, friction, and it's getting blurred out by the sun and fading, and it's changing its form. And it's not quite trash anymore, it's actually a new ecosystem, and animals are evolving themselves to be comfortable in it. So there are times when the content of a thing can be its most crucial information. When the skin of it doesn't matter, it's about what's on the interior. And this is where there's a collapse and distinction between the image and the thing it's referencing. And this whole time I've been talking about how important the skin is, and how, like with the actress, we barely even needed Liz to be around anymore because we could just have the skin, so we didn't really need the real thing. And now I'm going to totally turn tail and say that it's the content that's important. So this is a sponge spicule. And I studied these for a long time, and my job was to draw them, like under the microscope, break down a sponge and then draw it, because you can have two sponges that look identical from the outside, and when you break them down, their interior structure is these little spicules, and they come in all different forms, and usually it's the spicule that will tell you what species it is and how it differentiates from this other one that looks exactly like it, but it's different because of this spicule. So it's the interior structure of it that actually gives it a separate name, which, by the way, we all make up anyway, taxonomy-wise. But I'm going to end on a drip. This is my last drip, and not my favorite, but a really good one. This is the pitch drip experiment. Have you guys heard of it? Yeah. So it's one of the longest running scientific experiments in the world. And no one, to my knowledge, has actually seen it drop with their own eyes. There's two that are going on right now. One's in Australia and one's in Dublin. And the one in Australia, the last time it dripped, the computers were offline, so they didn't catch it. But think about that as your career, right? Yeah, to wait for this drip to fall. So pitch is like this naturally occurring substance. But the drip happens in like 1/10 of a second. And your only job is to be there when it happens. So there's something here about functioning within a crucial place in the unknown, where the care that we put into the attention and the digestion of a thing or the moment is the important thing, right? So it's the journey. That what drives us is not the knowing when or the what, but the waiting for it. The thing we see is never quite now. We're looking at this drip, but we're not looking at it. We're looking at potentially what it might do or might be. So it's this anticipation of something that will arrive later. So this is what's important to me when experiencing artwork, when making artwork, or when thinking about artwork, is this place of unknown. And I was joking with a friend about the Renaissance Society, just like how you go to the show and every show is so personal. It's like this mint, and you can only put it in your mouth, and you like take it and then you leave, and then you can still kind of like taste it in your mouth. And then later as you're walking, you're just thinking like, what was in that? Thank you.